Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Breaking the Narrative. I'm your host, Liliana Zylstra, and I'm excited to share with you a conversation with Monica Snyder. Monica is the executive director of Secular Pro-Life. She has degrees in chemical biology and forensic science, and she takes a particular interest in the biological facts and peer-reviewed research related to the abortion debate. Monica and I talked about the role of identity in persuasion, pro-life laws and how the media reports on abortion, and how pro-life advocates can communicate more clearly. In some ways, it's a dark time for the pro-life movement. We're facing many challenges politically and in the media, but I also have a lot of hope. I've seen minds change on abortion, and I think that more minds will continue to change. We're in a battle for public opinion, and we're fighting a pro-abortion narrative that obscures the reality of abortion and sidesteps the question of the humanity of the unborn. This show is about breaking that narrative. So Monica, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited just to get your thoughts on a number of topics. And I want to start by talking about your organization, Secular Pro-Life. I've been following you guys for a long time, and I really appreciate so much of the stuff that you put out there. I think you do a great job with communicating and bringing clarity to the abortion debate. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the goal of Secular Pro-Life. As a Christian myself, I think this is true for many people in the pro-life movement, we view our pro-life work as very connected to this religious framework for human value. But your organization shows that people of all different worldviews can oppose abortion, and I think that's important because of the role that identity plays in why someone might consider themselves to be pro-life or pro-choice. I think that it can maybe be a barrier to persuasion when people believe that in order to be pro-life, I also have to follow this whole other set of beliefs as well. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you view the role that identity plays in the abortion debate, and then how Secular Pro-Life addresses that.
Yeah, that's a great question. The pro-life movement has a lot of people who cover pro-life apologetics. There's many different books you can read about how to defend cases against abortion. There's a lot of work on the pro-life side to make people effective at convincing people that the pro-life position is logical and ethical. And I think that's all very important, and I'm glad that we do it. But I think for a lot of people, their position on abortion is only partially informed by philosophy or biology or sort of these intellectual pursuits, or maybe not at all, partially or not at all informed by that. And a lot of it is informed by who their social circles are and who they trust. And I don't mean this just for pro-choice people. I mean for pro-life people too. In fact, I don't even mean it just about abortion. It could be any topic. Nobody can have encyclopedic knowledge on every single topic. And a lot of times we have sort of maybe mild opinions about different topics based largely on who we trust and who we know and what we've heard. And in that sense, identity is actually enormously important to whether someone considers themselves pro-life or pro-choice. At Secular Pro-Life, we have had a lot of people tell us over the years that our existence, we are atheist-led, I'm an atheist, our existence as secular people who oppose abortion not only provoked thought for them because they're used to thinking about it along very common tribal lines. Christians are against abortion and secular people are okay with it, or it doesn't have to be religion. It could also be politics. It could be other things too. Not only was it thought-provoking to them to see an organization that's sort of crossing those lines, but for some of them, they had already been thinking to themselves privately for a while that they felt like they were not okay with abortion. They felt like it really was very problematic, maybe even definitely something they wanted to say something about, and they just didn't see a space for them to say anything. And it's almost as if our existence was giving them permission to say what they really think. And again, I don't think this is specific to pro-choice people. I think a lot of people do this. We've had secular people and leftist people and queer people and all the people that I call the non-traditional pro-life people tell us over the years that they already agreed about the ethics of the issue. We didn't persuade them to see abortion as a problem. They already thought it was a problem. What we did was tell them that they're welcome to say whatever they want about it. And there's no rule saying that you have to fit certain stereotypes before you're allowed to say, I'm not okay with this. And some of that is leading by example, and some of it is saying it explicitly. We talk about how we think everyone should be against abortion. It's not a religious issue, it's a human rights issue. Religion can coincide with it, like you said, but it doesn't have to. And also, we've had Christians come to us who felt like they didn't have a substantial reason to be pro-life. They felt like all they had was their private religious views and they didn't know how to use that to articulate anything to anyone else. So even though they were Christian and they considered themselves pro-life, they were quite muted on the subject. And then they found our organization and our content and they felt like it gave them the language and the framing they needed to explain to other people what they already thought. In fact, Pew Research, I think it was Pew Research, I'm pretty sure, they had survey data on this where they found that fully 1 out of 2 people who think abortion should be illegal all or most of the time, which is what I'm calling pro-lifers, people who think abortion should be illegal all or most of the time, fully half of them said that they did not consider religion their primary moral guide, not just about abortion in general. So you have an enormous number of people who either are not religious and maybe have a problem with abortion, or who are religious and do have a problem with abortion, but not necessarily because of their religion. And they feel like they have no way to articulate this, and they feel like they don't have people to talk to about it. And they also feel like they don't have people to support them in this discussion. And so you have this enormous number of people who are muted. And again, this is before you even get into trying to convince a pro-choice person to be pro-life, which is a whole separate important endeavor. I'm just talking about people who are already pro-life. And they feel like because of their impressions of how identity plays into this debate, they have no place to speak and they don't know what to say, which is an enormous waste. So I think identity is hugely important. I think that it would be nice if, rationally, the only things that mattered is what's the most sound philosophical argument, what are the biological facts, and then once we assess that truth-seeking endeavor, we can all, rationally and calmly agree on what makes sense. But realistically, that's not really how it plays out for most people. It's a factor. It's not nothing. But for most people, there's other issues going on before they even get to the philosophical questions, and a lot of it is a question of identity. So I think it can't be overstated.
I want to move to a question that I think is been in the news a lot recently. We've seen this whole kind of narrative set up that pro-life laws that are being passed in certain states, that these laws are going to lead to women dying or other health consequences for women. And it almost seems like the debate right now in the media is not at all about, the ethics of abortion. Kind of like you said, we're not necessarily focusing on that question, but it's more what will be the practical effects of laws associated with abortion. And so the narrative right now is that women will die if we pass pro-life laws. And specifically, I want to talk about 2 really tragic deaths in Georgia that have been reported on recently, the deaths of Amber Thurman and Candy Miller. And I believe that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz both referenced these cases recently, and they blamed these tragic deaths on Georgia's pro-life laws. So can you talk a little bit about what's going on here, how the media has been reporting on this, and then what actually happened?
Yes. So first, to frame this in a larger context, maternal mortality rates are a problem. In the United States, they are particularly poor for a first world country, although it still comes out to 0.02% of women who are pregnant will have a maternal related death. So absent any other specific information, if you are a pregnant woman, you have a 0.02% chance of death. We would like it to be a 0% chance. It's still quite low. That said, there will always be women in every state who are going to experience medical complications, medical malpractice, and other issues we do what we can to mitigate it. The problem here is that if a state has an abortion ban or, a heartbeat bill or whatever they have, the media is willing to take any woman who dies from an obstetric related issue and try to say it's because of the ban. If you want to know what is contributing to maternal mortality, you have to be open to following the evidence where it goes and not just trying to fit all stories into a narrative about abortion bans. And the cases of Amber Thurman and Candy Miller demonstrate exactly what happens when you've decided in advance what the problems are without actually critically thinking about it. In fact, they're pretty egregious because in Amber Thurman's case, she was pregnant with twins and she went to, I think it was North Carolina, and she legally obtained abortion pills from a clinic there. And then she went home after taking, I think she took the first one and she went home and she was supposed to take the other ones later. And then she had lethal complications from abortion pills. The other side will rush to tell you that's exceedingly rare. Okay, but that's what happened. And her boyfriend ended up taking her, I think he called 911 and they took her to the hospital. So, first thing to note is that she was already in the middle of an ongoing emergency when she got to the hospital. And the reason this is important is because the pro-choice side will claim that the laws are very unclear, and that even though the laws do say you can always intervene in a medical emergency, they all say that. Every single one of them says you can intervene in a medical emergency. But the pro-choice side will claim that's not good enough because doctors aren't sure how much of an emergency it has to be to qualify. Do they have to wait until there's a raging infection? Do they have to wait until she's actively dying before they're allowed to intervene? Or can they intervene in anticipation of that likely happening when it hasn't happened yet? That's the argument they will often make. In Amber Thurman's case, that doesn't apply at all. She was already in the middle of an ongoing emergency. It wasn't how long do we have to wait to see if it becomes an emergency. It was an emergency. They brought her there in an ambulance. They called 911 and brought her there. She was in the middle of an emergency. And you know that they knew that because they administered antibiotics. They knew that she already had an infection and that they should have intervened. That's the first problem. Georgia's abortion law says you can intervene in a medical emergency, which she had. Georgia's abortion law also says you can remove the remains of an unborn child. And that was the problem with her. She had retained fetal tissue, retained products of conception after the abortion pills. And very importantly, Georgia's abortion law is a heartbeat law, which means that it only applies if there's a detectable fetal heartbeat, and there wasn't. There are at least 3 ways that Georgia's abortion law very clearly did not prevent them from saving Amber Thurman's life, and still they did not. And so it's a pretty obvious case of medical malpractice. In fact, her family has obtained an attorney who is suing the hospital and has already said in press statements that the doctors had a duty to intervene according to current Georgia law. So this is not an issue of the law prevented them from intervening. This is another issue. And sometimes when we talk about this, they'll say, well, what other reason could there be? Any of a dozen or more. There are reasons that maternal mortality is high. Some of them are incidental that we need to fix structurally. Some of them are incompetence. Some of them are dismissing very serious medical complications for women. There's lots of problems in the healthcare setting in general and when it comes to women that we've known about for a long time. The other side is very quick to acknowledge this when it comes to women being pressured into going on contraception they don't want, or women being pressured into sterilization, or women not being allowed to get sterilized, or women not being told about ways that they can mitigate the risk of miscarriage, or not being told about how they can obtain fetal remains after a miscarriage, or the so-called husband stitch, where you've given birth and then they stitch you up more than they are supposed to, allegedly to increase sexual pleasure for your husband. There's a million examples of the healthcare community, the medical industry, not giving appropriate medical care to women. And they're all serious and we should care about them and look to mitigate them. But suddenly, if there's an abortion ban in place, the only narrative they're interested in is finding any possible wisp of a hint of maybe that the abortion ban prevented people from providing care. And then they say that that's the only reason they can think of. There's no critical thinking here at all. There are other cases in other states that don't have abortion restrictions where women either had major complications or died from lack of proper care after miscarriage. And those don't make national headlines because there's no way to fit those into a narrative about abortion bans, but they do happen. So Amber Thurman had lethal complications from taking legal abortion pills and then experienced medical malpractice when the hospital decided not to intervene for 20 hours, which is completely inexcusable, and they should be sued. Candy Miller, it's even worse in the sense of trying to make this about the abortion law because she obtained abortion pills illegally. If I recall correctly, she suffered from chronic conditions and she probably had a pretty precarious relationship with the healthcare industry independent of this situation. She obtained abortion pills illegally and took them, and she was in enormous amounts of pain because she was also having lethal complications from abortion pills, which we're told are very rare. And she never went to a formal medical setting to seek help, allegedly because she was afraid that she would be prosecuted, which is tragic because Georgia's abortion law does not prosecute women who seek abortions. And the autopsy said that they found retained fetal tissue in her from the abortion pills did not complete the expulsion the way they were supposed to. And she also had overdosed on a combination of painkillers, including fentanyl, which is very ominous because her family said she had no history of drug use. And they don't know if she was trying to manage horrific pain because she was scared to go to a medical setting or what was going on. And the whole thing is tragic. It's a disaster. It's a disaster anyway, but it's also a disaster because she already had other children. So did Amber Thurman. These cases are very, very serious. But if people are serious about making sure women are protected and understanding why they happen, then they should be going into it trying to actually understand why they happen instead of just assuming from the get-go that anyone who dies in a state that has an abortion ban, it must be because of the ban, despite there being no evidence of that or even evidence to the contrary. And then you give doctors who are not doing their duties as they're supposed to in Thurman's case, and the general medical community, when there's a lack of trust, a lack of connection, like in Miller's case, you give them a pass. We don't have to address any of those issues because we have basically told them that they can just say they were afraid of an abortion ban that very explicitly said they could intervene. And it doesn't make any sense and it's not helping anybody. So, all that to say, though, I think this is important for the pro-life side to reckon with. There are plenty of cases of denial of care where if you look at them with any kind of critical eye, you can see that they're not related to abortion bans, and we should have a problem with that and we should be suspicious. But I do think it's important that anything we can control on our end, we need to take care to. And so different states have different levels of clarity of language. I think Texas was particularly clear. Ohio, before they overturned their ban, they had very, very explicit language. And I think there are some states where maybe it is more vague, or even if they think it's clear and other people aren't understanding, you can issue guidance through the hospitals. You can issue guidance through state healthcare boards and things like that to say, listen, in case anyone wasn't sure, in case there's a lack of trust between the pro-life and pro-choice sides and all these things, we are not against life-saving interventions. We are against the over 95% of abortions that are performed on healthy embryos and fetuses carried by healthy women when there is no medical emergency of any kind. That's what we're against. And so if you want to work with us to make sure that that is completely unambiguous and that people that are in authentic medical emergencies can get the care they need, we want to work with you. We're not against medical emergencies. We're not against life-saving interventions. We're against elective abortion. And to the extent that we can very clearly draw those lines, we want to the extent that you insist on muddying them, yeah, it's going to be a problem. The other side tries to act as if the only way to make sure that no one ever is denied emergency care is to have no regulations of abortion. That is not a starting position. We know that all over the world they have limitations on abortion. There are very, very few. It's something like 96%, I forget the exact percentage, it's over 90% of all countries internationally, including most first world countries, have limits on abortion. Europe, it's common for them to have limits at 12 weeks, at 15 weeks, whatever. There are a select few countries in Europe where it is essentially banned, and they don't have these problems of denial of care that are allegedly because everyone is terrified that if they remove the remains of an unborn child during a medical emergency, anyone would object to that anywhere. It's absurd. So there's a problem of excuse me. There's a problem of hyperbole. There's a problem of media misinformation and disinformation. If there's any problem of actual ambiguity on our end, we need to reckon with that and fix it. But I will tell you that I'm very skeptical because in the Thurman case, there were 3 ways that Georgia abortion law did not apply to our situation, and they still claimed it did. So I think we just need to keep being very, very clear about what it is we are against and what it is we are for, and very, very clear that what the laws actually say. Notice when they have media coverage, these denial of care stories, when you read them, look and see if they quote the law. I can't think of a single story so far where they quoted the law at all. They usually don't reference it. They just talk about doctors they interviewed, sometimes that aren't even from that state, and what they said they thought the law might mean, and they don't quote the law. Texas's law is exceedingly clear about how it has no application to missed miscarriage, no application to ectopic pregnancy, all these things. People often have no idea. They just assume that it must be confusing, otherwise people wouldn't be confused.
Wow. So just to summarize, you're saying that Amber Thurman and Candy Miller, these 2 women from Georgia who tragically died, they died because of abortion pills, and yet their deaths have been used to say that pro-life laws, which didn't apply at all in either case, are to blame. That's what you're saying.
Mostly. So I think it's, yes, mostly. They died because of abortion pills plus other problems. Because
Right. Plus
theoretically,
medical negligence.
yeah, it's possible that if Candy Miller had gone to an emergency room, they could have saved her. It's possible that if Amber Thurman's medical team was remotely competent, she would be fine. So it's not just the abortion pills by themselves,
Right.
it's the abortion pills plus other problems. But it's also true that if Thurman had not taken abortion pills, she probably also wouldn't have died. So it's a multiple variable equation. One of those variables is abortion pills. But I think it's hard to argue that one of those variables is the Georgia abortion law because it very clearly didn't apply.
Right. Okay. So you said, we need to be clear about what we're for and what we're against. So I want to talk about that and just more generally, the idea of abortion being medically necessary. I know that some pro-life groups say that abortion is never medically necessary, but we also have these laws that, ban abortion with the exception of saving the mother's life. So I think that can be confusing for some people. How do
Yes.
you talk about that issue? How do you deal with that, and like how should pro-life advocates generally address that in conversation? How should we kind of present this?
That is a great question. I think it's very important, especially now in a post-Roe world. The problem is that there is no one single definition of abortion. That's the reality. Not in medicine, not in ethics, not in law, nothing. And we're getting to the point where if you're going to even use the word abortion, you better be very, very clear about exactly what you mean. And a lot of people don't. And the other side will claim, well, we just don't understand the medical definition. Historically, the medical definition was any ending of pregnancy before 20 weeks. That's why it would include spontaneous abortion, which is miscarriage, and induced abortion, which is what we usually think of as like elective abortion, therapeutic abortion for potentially emergency situations. But they were all called abortion. Just any ending of the pregnancy before 20 weeks was an abortion of some type. And now that's been muddied. A lot of people in the pregnancy loss community really, really dislike the affiliation of the word abortion with miscarriage because they think it assigns blame. And then on the other end, we have abortion activists, abortion advocates talking about abortion well after 20 weeks, talking about abortion even into the third trimester. Even major medical organizations will talk about abortion after 21 weeks, abortion in the third trimester. If it was historically only meant for 20 weeks or earlier, they've changed the definition on purpose or not, doesn't really matter. There's no single definition of abortion. So there are a couple ways that you could try to make sure you're communicating clearly when you talk about this, people. One of the ways is to try to avoid the word abortion and instead substitute the exact procedure or situation you're talking about. So, for example, a lot of times I will say life-saving interventions. I don't really care if you call them abortion or not. I care if you understand what I'm talking about. And I'm talking about situations where her life is at risk. Can they intervene? It could be a DNC, it could be abortion pills, it could be whatever. It could be induction of labor, it could be C-section, it could be a lot of different things. But I'm not against life-saving interventions, whatever those interventions are. So one strategy is to try to avoid the word abortion because it's so ambiguous and just say what you mean, using other words that people will understand. That's one strategy. Another strategy is to try to make sure you understand what the person you're talking to means by abortion and then just reflect their definition of it and then use that to communicate your point. So it is controversial in pro-life circles, especially among pro-life activists. It's controversial to use the phrase emergency abortion or the phrase life-saving abortion because they will react and say abortion is never medically necessary. If it's an emergency, it's not an abortion. Da, 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 da. That's fine. I'm not interested in the vocab debate. I'm interested if the person I'm talking to understands clearly what I'm trying to say. So if they're talking about life-saving abortions versus elective abortions, I will use those phrases too, because I think we both understand the distinction that we're drawing. And I don't have a problem calling a life-saving intervention an abortion, depending on what we're talking about. Like if it's like an emergency C-section at 38 weeks and the baby goes to the NICU, I'm not calling that an abortion. Okay. But like if it's in a circumstance where I think the average pro-choice or pro-life person, what I sometimes jokingly call the civilians that aren't, in this all the time, constantly talking about it, if they would think of that as an abortion and that's how they're phrasing it, fine. As long as we're talking about the same thing, that's fine. And so what I will explain is the take I've been increasingly using, the framing, is to say, listen, there are situations when an abortion, or if you prefer to say, a termination of pregnancy and ending of pregnancy, it will cause the death of the child, and it's necessary to protect the mother's life. That is healthcare, and that should be legal, and I'm not against that. It's tragic. I don't like it. Nobody likes it, but that is a legitimate situation where you have a medical emergency and you're intervening to do what you can. And then there are situations where if you didn't intervene, nobody would die. The mom's not going to die. The child's not going to die. Nobody's even in a medical emergency at all. The reality is that the overwhelming majority of abortions performed in the United States have nothing to do with medical emergencies. And that's what we're against. That's not healthcare. That's not medically indicated. The other side will try to say everything's medical. I just had a what I call a TikTok doc, a medical professional on TikTok who, wears scrubs and has MD in her screen name and stuff. She's not in obstetrics, but she's a TikTok doc. And she had a video saying that because a woman's risk to her life is higher when she's pregnant than when she's not pregnant, every single abortion is medically necessary, all of them, which is absurd. It's like saying my risk of being hit by a car is higher when I'm on the highway than when I'm not on the highway. That's true. That doesn't mean that I can shoot other drivers in case they might run into me because it's a higher risk. That's not how that works at all. If you're talking about self-defense, if you're talking about triage, if you're talking about what's medically necessary, it's not enough to say your risk is in any way increased, no matter how minuscule. You have to show that there's some sort of proportionate response. So the other side tries to claim that all abortions are medically necessary, and I think it's because they recognize that the average person who's not super into this debate is deeply sympathetic to actual medical interventions in emergencies. Americans want to make sure women aren't committing suicide via pregnancy because they can't get the health care they need. Everyone is deeply sympathetic to that, and far less sympathetic to aborting embryos and fetuses who are perfectly healthy, carried by women who are healthy when there is no emergency. That's not nearly as politically tenable. And so they try to conflate the two. So anyway, if people are saying abortion is never medically, I would like it if the pro-life movement never again, nobody said abortion is never medically necessary, because I think it's very poor communication. Almost everyone who says that, what they mean is the way I define abortion is elective abortion only. And if it's a medically necessary situation, I don't define that as an abortion. That's what they mean. But very few of the people listening to them know that's what they mean. And so instead of the meaning they're trying to impart, which is that abortion means this specific thing, that's not what people hear. They hear, I don't think pregnancy can be dangerous. I don't think women are going to face complications, or I don't care about it. That's what they hear. I think the phrase abortion is never medically necessary is very poor communication, and I think we should never say it again. Instead, if you're not comfortable calling emergent interventions abortion, if you're just not comfortable saying that, that's okay. Then just don't use the word abortion. Just say, we're not against life-saving interventions. We're against elective abortion. Just say that, and that answers the spirit of their question. When people are worried, do you care if women are in danger? Yeah, we care. We don't want people to be in danger. That has nothing to do with most abortions.
That's a very helpful way to think about what I think is one of the biggest and most confusing issues for a lot of people in the abortion debate. I'm curious, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that pro-choice people have about abortion?
Question. Okay, I think that now pro-choice people aren't a monolith, so it depends on what kind of pro-choice person you're talking about. But if I had to pick just one thing, I think that they dramatically overestimate how many abortions have anything to do with emergencies, rape, or fatal anomaly. I think that's top of mind for the vast majority of pro-choice people. Those are the cases they're really worried about, and they have no idea how many abortions have nothing to do with that. I think most pro-choice people don't realize how many abortions happen per year. I think most pro-choice people don't realize or flatly refuse to believe how many abortions happen very late in pregnancy, including after the child could be viable. I also think we need to have a much larger, more focused conversation about the problem of unwanted and coerced abortions. There was a study, I think in 2023, that found that of all the women who had abortions, 24% described their abortions as unwanted or coerced. And if there's about 1 million abortions a year in the United States, that means 240,000 women a year getting abortions they consider unwanted or coerced. I think that pro-choice people want to make sure women are safe and that women have options and autonomy in their lives. And those are both noble motivations. I appreciate those motivations. But I think that there's this utopia fallacy where they think that the best way to maximize female autonomy and to make sure people have options in difficult situations is to just not have restrictions on abortion. And even if you don't care at all about the value of a prenatal child's life, if you just see it as a clump of cells, even if that's true, If you care about women, you should understand that when you destigmatize abortion and you treat it as any other healthcare with no controversy whatsoever, you're not being honest. Plenty of women who get abortions recognize that it's far more serious than that. And you're not recognizing that a society that destigmatizes abortion increases the pressure for women to get abortions. It's not just maximal autonomy, it's pressure in a different direction. Because the reality is that when you are pregnant, especially in difficult circumstances, you will need help. Women are not meant to carry pregnancies and then deal with the pregnancy and the childbirth and the child all by themselves as an individual island. That's a ridiculous thing to ask of anybody. Ideally, you will have a supportive partner, you will have family and friends around you, you will have a community that's going to help you during what will take a lot of your physical and emotional and mental resources to do, to say nothing of financial. Lots of resources to have a healthy pregnancy. It shouldn't be all on just the pregnant woman. So if a woman is pregnant, she's looking around at the people she's closest to in her general community and thinking, are they going to help me with this? And if abortion is supposed to be this neutral thing, or even better, even worse, a positive thing, women's empowerment, it's a fundamental right, etc., it's harder and harder for the individual woman to make a case that when she is pregnant in a difficult situation, whether it's poverty, whether it's disability, whether it's abuse, whether it's a terrible relationship, she doesn't have a house, whatever, all these potential reasons that it's not ideal, perfect situation to have a baby, she now has to justify how she could demand that support and those resources from her community when she could, quote, just take care of it. The reality is, everyone recognizes that when you stigmatize abortion, you pressure people to carry their pregnancies. You might think that's a good thing, a bad thing, whatever, but they see the relationship very clearly. But then they have a harder time recognizing that the reverse is also true. When you destigmatize abortion, more women will feel pressured to abort. Their partners will say, you can't ruin my life like this. Sometimes it's their mothers who will say, you can't expect people to do this. I've read stories where women get pregnant and it's not even a terrible situation. It's just an unexpected situation. And their girlfriends will say, don't even tell him. It's not fair to put that pressure on him. You're going to ruin his life. That is the result of destigmatized abortion. And so I think pro-choice people could understand a lot more about biology and fetal development, and I do think that matters. We've seen people tell us that once they realized how early fetal development happens, they started to have their wait a minute moment about this whole thing. I think that that is important. And I think that there are a lot of, frankly, just absurd ideas about who pro-lifers are and what they want, that it's amazing that they even are able to flourish. And it would be helpful if they understood us as the full complex human beings we are, and if they understood that our motivation is to protect children, not oppress women. That would also be helpful. But just even from a pro-choice framing, even if you don't care about the embryo or fetus at all, even if you can't stand pro-lifers, okay, fine. It would be helpful to understand that many abortions happen because they feel pressured into it, and that should be concerning.
So we've talked a little bit about kind of how pro-life people can better communicate and be more clear about what our views are. Is there anything else that you maybe would change about how the pro-life movement communicates, or any particular thing that you think is most important for us as pro-life advocates to keep in mind when we're engaging with people that are pro-choice?
This is especially for people who are online a lot. There are certain ways to engage online that can make things more helpful or not, and we have a blog post about that. I can send it to you later. But it's really important to remember that the way people interact online does not represent very well at all the way people interact in person and the way most people think about this. It's easy if you're arguing online a lot to think that your opposition are all just really terrible people. And it's not true. I have had many good friendships, many good conversations with pro-choice people. I strongly recommend maintaining friendships with people who disagree with you, whether it's on abortion or anything else, because it keeps you grounded. You'll have a better sense of what they really think and why if you are friends with them than if you're just reading about it theoretically somewhere. You'll have a better sense of where the common ground is and how to have good conversations. And it's better for your mental health because you're much less likely to start drinking the Kool-Aid that half the country is evil and stupid and where is humanity going if you're friends with people who think differently than you and you're like, well, not my friend though. She's all right. It's really very, very helpful. If you're going to talk about this in person with people, I have several ideas. First of all, don't feel like you have to convince someone in one conversation to agree with you. That almost never happens. People change their minds slowly with low pressure over time. Think on the order of months and years, and don't worry about it. Your goal is not to convince someone in a single conversation to see the truth and righteousness of our side, although I do think our side has truth and righteousness. But your goal is to let them know that they can talk to you about this and you're not going to freak out. And you'll be honest. If they bring up a point and you're not sure of your rebuttal, don't be defensive. Just say, that's an interesting point. I need to think about it. I need to look into it. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Just say that. That's okay. It's better for you and it's better for them. You build trust when you will admit that you're not sure how to answer something. And your ego is less involved. So if it turns out you were wrong about something, it'll be easier for you to say that. That's another thing. If you want them to eventually see your point, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say they might have been wrong about something. And the way to do that is to affirm their good intentions, affirm any common ground you have, and basically say, I get where you're coming from in here and here and here. And just for me, put it on you. For me, I can't follow you because of these reasons. For me personally, you don't put it on them. The last thing you want to do is make someone think that you think they're evil or stupid, because then in order for them to later say they were wrong and you were right, they first have to agree with you that they were evil or stupid. Nobody's going to do that. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say maybe they should reconsider. Take your time, low pressure, emphasize common ground all the time. Anywhere there's common ground, be like, yeah, that's a good point. I can see that point, But for me, da 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 da, and just make it really low pressure, not hostile. I will say too, don't go too far the other way. I see pro-life people. It's like they think you either have to do this Ben Shapiro style poning the libs thing, which I don't find helpful, or you have to do almost be too apologetic and friendly, too like, don't be mad at me, I'm actually not weird, don't be too aggressive, don't be too apologetic, just be straightforward. It's like, yeah, this is what I think. I'm not sorry. We could talk about it if you want, just be straightforward and give yourself plenty of time. That's what I would do.
I think that's some really excellent advice and a good note to end this conversation on. Monica, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. This has been really interesting.
Thanks for having me.
How can our listeners find out more about you and the work that you do?
Our website is secularprolife.org, and we are also on all the major media channels. Usually it's the username Secular Pro-Life, all one word. Some of them we had to do like underscores and things. But if you really want to keep track with us, the best way to do it is to get on our email newsletter. We typically send it out on Fridays, and we have more content than we can even handle. And so on Fridays, we email out usually a summary. We'll pick one of our favorite articles that we wrote and then have a summary of our most popular tweets, video content that we've created. So to sign up for that, you would go to secularprolife.org/contact. And there's a form right there you can sign up for. That's the best way to really keep track of like if we have events coming up, anything like that.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Breaking the Narrative. Stay tuned for the next episode.